Hello and welcome to the induction session 3 for adoption panel members, and this time we're going to be looking at the adoption assessment report. But before we do this, it's important that we actually look at the adoption process once again, just to remind ourselves of exactly how it works. So it starts with contacting the agency, an inquiry. That's either by a telephone or a web form. And what we can do is we hold every other month on an online information event and give the individual inquirer an opportunity to think, or what will happen is they'll make their initial inquiry without actually attending an online information event. This will lead to further discussion and then ultimately what we call a welcome or initial visit. Following this, if the information is promising, what we will ask the inquirer to do is submit a registration of interest form. That is then received and reviewed by the agency, and then what will happen is that the inquirer will then enter stage 1 of the adoption process, and that's for a period of 8 weeks. And then if that goes well, and that represents all checks and references, and if that goes well and there are no glaring issues, they are then invited to start stage 2. Following stage 2, which is the assessment by an assessing social worker, they will then move on to the approval panel, and then there will be matching, which entails actually speaking to regional adoption agencies and or local authorities about potential children who are open and ready for adoption. The prospective adopters will then go through the matching panel of the local authority or regional adoption agency, and then what will happen is a child or children will be placed with the adopters, and then after 90 days there's an adoption order, and then the adoption order becomes permanent. As you can see, between stage 1 and stage 2 there is the ability to take a 6-month break. So that's the process overall. What you see here are the time frames in which the agency is working, and what happens at each stage. Then what happens is the prospective adopters will have a date for panel, and normally what happens is panel documentation is received 2 weeks before the panel date, and then you've got the approval decision by the agency decision maker, and they have to approve within 7 working days of receiving the adoptions panel's recommendations and minutes, and then the prospective adopters need to be informed. That will be verbally in the first 2 days, and then following that it's the decision by the agency decision maker, ADM, and that's normally within 5 working days. So what's the role of the adoption assessor when we get to stage 2? Well, they are to assess and prepare prospective adopters to prepare biological children to become an adoptive household, to complete all additional references and also reports, to prepare the Adoption Assessment Report for adoption panel to work independently to a high standard and within specified timescales, and they will be liaising with and receiving support from the adoption manager in relation to completing the adoption assessment report. So in and of itself, when a assessing social worker begins stage 2, what are they doing? What does it comprise of? As you can see there, a series of interviews. Applicants will be interviewed at least once, both individually and with their partner, and all other members of the household will also be interviewed along with children. Prospective foster carers are meant to complete a family tree and chronology of key events in their lives, and as you can see, the areas which that covers, and anything that is unusual or there is a pattern, these need to be explored by the assessing social worker. All information provided by the applicant must be independently verified where possible. So in other words, what's being said is self-reporting is actually not enough. Evidence is required. Where a applicant is divorced or separated, there is a need for the assessing social worker to actually look at the factors that contributed to the breakdown in the relationship. There also needs to be adequacy and safety in the prospective home of adopters, and also transport would be assessed, and furthermore, where there are pets, a risk assessment does need to be carried out, and obviously this is informed by legislation and guidance. The other thing that the assessing social worker has to consider is the likely need for adoption support services, obviously the family's finances and the criteria for financial support, and also the applicant's willingness to notify the agency if the adopted child dies during childhood or shortly afterwards. Their views on post-adoption, post-placement and post-adoption contact will be very important going forward. And as you can see, the adoption assessment report is actually owned by Bernardo, but we also make use of Coram Bath forms for things like health and safety, pet assessment and financial assessment. In terms of information sharing, as you can see there, it's got to be concerned with the adopter records if there are any previous records, and it will also extend to previous partners as well. And obviously the current assessing social worker needs to be satisfied with any records in relation to key people that he or she has not been able to access in the first instance. So here is the adoption assessment report. As said, it has been created by Bernardo, and there are a number of agencies that are now beginning to use this form. The R is actually based on dyadic development psychotherapy principles, so you might know this as PACE. Also attachment theory and secure based model, so it's very much rooted in supporting and enabling the child. As you can see, assessors have to demonstrate where evidence has been obtained from, and this in and of itself needs to be made very explicitly. In terms of how the assessing social worker actually completes the R, as you can see, there are 3 bullet points there. It's essential that there is triangulation, so it's not simply based on self-reporting. There is an expectation that the assessor must provide an explanation to back up their conclusion, and general assertions that the prospective adopter is aware of therapeutic parenting has to be made. In terms of the structure of the R, what are we talking about? Well, at the front of the document is the agency information, and then you've got the applicant information, and much of this will be taken from the registration of interest. And then we go into section B, and it moves through the story of the family, beginning with the current family life, the here and now, then moving to family of origin and life story, and then finally finishing with parenting through adoption. So looking at what parenting as an adopter actually looks like and will feel like. Then you finally got section C. This is the confidential agency information that's not actually shared with the prospective adopter. So as you can see, there's the medical report, there's the references, there's the checks, and there's the verification, and then finally agency tracking information. And we'll make sure that you've got a copy of the R, in the sense of you can see a PDF version of some of the pages on how it works, so you can have some level of confidence about what you're looking at. An important aspect of the form is, in actual fact, gaining the views of the prospective adopters, and so this will happen towards the end of the assessment. And as you can see there, applicants are encouraged to complete the assessment independently, and obviously if there are any difficulties, to come back to the agency. And very importantly, this section of the R is reviewed with applicants by the assessor. As part of the process, the assessor will actually speak to referees, both personal and professional, in terms of work, and any other person as well. They'll also take up a church reference, and as you can see, these are in the bullet points, the items that are discussed. The assessor will also speak to any previous partners, and where prospective adopters have their own birth children, they will also work alongside the family support worker to actually gather the views of children in the family home as to whether or not they are prepared for adoption. You can see what happens with former partners, and also the children of applicants where they're living away from home may also be contacted, and references sought from them, obviously where that proves necessary. So as the assessing social worker gets to the end, what they have to do is summarise and highlight the strengths and vulnerabilities which are drawn from sections B1, 2 and 3 on the R. There is an expectation that the assessing social worker will make reference to existing research, and also we'll think about how that informs practice in terms of matching. There will be the identification of protective factors as well as areas of development. And also there will be a indication of the support needs for the adopters. And then there'll be an adoption support plan, which will need to be specific and smart in order to meet the needs of the child. So as we move towards the assessment report being completed for adopters, you can see the reasons for any recommendations related to any areas of risk need to be given the same attention as positive recommendations. And we need to remember that when placing children, what we have is a good guess at whether or not adoptive parents can actually meet the needs of that child. But that should not stop the panel from making a recommendation whatsoever. And again, an important aspect of the report will be to highlight any matching considerations as well. There is an R toolkit. What we mean by that is that Bernardo's have produced a series of activities that can be used with children and young people to help them just enable them to articulate, but also it's very good in terms of working directly with prospective adopters and current adopters without undermining or without causing them difficulty. And as you can see in the first bullet point, it is successfully used with adults with the aim of surprising their unconscious. So here what we're talking about is that there's growth and development even as the process continues. And as you can see there, the actual toolkit contains 7 sections, and you can see what that is about. And again, it's, they have examples of sculpts which could be used to speak about the current family, the changes that will be experienced when a child joins, and tools are both good for adults and for children. And here's a picture of the R toolkit. It does things like an identity wheel. It has exercises on your family worksheet. And again, here what we have towards the end of it is assessing partners or children in the family as well. Very good use of tools to help people report easily in relation to adoption and what their motivation is and how they are working, what considerations they've made, which is hugely important. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get back to me, Jenny Simpson, and I will seek to answer any questions that you have around the adoption assessment report. Thanks very much.